All right. We are live. So this is Cedo. What episode are we on here? 50.
51. 51.
All right. Episode 51. This week we have Smokey the Bear from Berachain. Smokey, thanks so much for being on, man.
Yeah, for sure, man. Good to be here. How you guys doing?
Doing well. Doing well. Definitely excited for this one. We've Cedo, when do you remember like the first time we talked about Berachain on here? I think it was like our very first episode, probably back
First, yeah.
last January. I think it was big
Oh,
on
no
your
way.
it was big on Cedo's always been a big fan. I've always been interested, but I think I've never really gotten the chance to like dive deep. So this is like especially exciting for me to help like fill that gap in my knowledge.
Yeah,
Um
this is a pretty full circle to me. I was listening to the Honeycast like Deep Bear moments last year. So yeah, this is pretty full circle. So I appreciate you coming on. We'll start off with, the name of the pod is Exit Liquidity. The exit liquidity question, just to hear a little bit more about you, how you kind of started in the ecosystem. You give us some insight into that and preface it with some moments that you might have been exit liquidity on your journey in crypto.
Oh, fuck. Yeah, so I first got involved in the space in like 2015. I was living out in the valley and was building my first company in a completely different industry, like opposite ends of the spectrum, like deep tech stuff. And basically started buying ETH and Bitcoin relatively early, and then just like an investor friend was pretty involved in these foundations. So it just kind of like, you see enough smart people running in a certain direction, you're like, okay, cool. Either everyone else is stupid or I'm stupid. And like I tend to bet on my stupidity. It's one of the things I'm most convicted on. So I decided that the move was to do that, and then play the 2017, 2018 cycle a whole bunch. And I was definitely someone's exit liquidity on Dragon Chain. I was also definitely someone's exit liquidity on. I remember this one like relatively micro slash like I don't know small cap called Oyster Pearl. I forgot exactly. Like I don't fucking remember what it did. I just remember that at some point, like it split into two different tokens, and then like the dev like giga rugged, but then either tried to refund it at some point. There was the oddest set of interactions here, but I just recall getting dumped onto no end. I think that happened to me again with DeFi Kingdoms at some point. I'm like, Jules at 20. Surely this this is the new meta of gaming, and this is much better than Axie, and then this will go to $100, $200. That aged really poorly, especially as soon as like the OTC market for Lockjewel ended up doing its thing. So I got this shit dumped out of me on that one. And I remember thinking that the cow swap was a good buy post airdrop. I think it's a really cool concept and like a very cool like application. Not a very good token in that sense. So yeah, I've definitely done my share of getting dumped on slash being exit like. So I think it's an important part of playing in the space, honestly. And internally we just call it like promotion to community member, right? So
Yeah.
I'm a member of many communities. I'm an avid community participator.
Yeah. Uh, this time, what was it like last year? You were on. I'm gonna reference the Honeycast a lot. Shout out to those
Yeah,
guys. Shout
yeah.
out to FW. And you mentioned some of like the autistic tendencies needed to be a founder of like a chain or even a protocol. I know like Papa is like super into like gaming or something like that on like random games. And
Yeah, yeah.
I think last episode on the Honeycast, you were just like randomly walking away from the microphone while talking, and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that
yeah.
resonated with me because I'm very much a firm believer in like especially chains. Like I feel like the founders have to be a good level of autistic. Where does that come from for you? How do you describe yourself with that?
Yeah, it's pretty funny. Um, I think it's more about like as a founder, in many cases, at a certain stage, you end up with like a unholy amount of like inbound, and you have to become good at like selecting what kind of stuff you actually need to answer right away, what kind of stuff you have to categorize for a little bit later. Like you just end up, suffering from information overflow in many cases, right? So I think that you end up developing habits or developing like certain things that you just do to help better like mentally categorize things. For me, in many cases, especially while I'm on calls, I will tend to like walk or pace in like circles, like in many, like not like just concentric circles, but there's like an island or some shit or like the perimeter of a room. I'm just out there doing what like call them like tism laps, like just out there just doing fucking circles in the kitchen or whatever it is, right? So I don't know exactly what my autistic edge is in that sense, but I think it's more that where I tend to direct a lot of my efforts is figuring out how I can be like doing like 5 things at once, for better or for worse. Sometimes that can be a problem, and sometimes you just gotta dial like stupid deep on things. But I think a lot of my job also ends up as being a filter to figure out how tasks need to get to the right endpoint, right? So is it okay? It needs to go to the validator team. I'll make an intro to one of the guys on the team. It's okay. Does it need to be an ecosystem project that's trying to figure something out? Does a new project want to learn about incubation? It's figuring out where all these different points go, with myself as a little bit of a central router. So I guess I see myself as like a shitty mailbox for autism.
Hmm. Is that like what most of your day to day consists of usually? I've always been curious as to like what a chain founder spends most of his time on.
It depends a lot on like where we are in the cycle, and or where we are on the the chain's life cycle, right, man? Or like so right now there's a whole bunch of stuff around testnet. There's talking to new projects. There's getting ready for launch on a whole bunch of different angles when it comes to setting up custodians and infrastructure providers and all the stuff in between. At sometimes there'll be fundraising competitions. At sometimes we'll probably have to navigate conversations around listings and all that kind of stuff. So I really do think like your job as a founder is to be able to boil the ocean to some extent, because if you leave a single box unchecked, then it becomes evident very quickly, I think, when it's like showtime, right? So the short answer is yeah, sometimes it's just like serving as a router to help distribute different tasks across the team so they all get done. Other times it's just nailing down like super hard on what we might want to focus on internally, right? So what could a cool launch game be? What should an ecosystem incentivization competition look like? Do we want to do something fun to get people engaged in March? All that kind of stuff. So I'd say it's a healthy split of those different initiatives. And if we had to break it down, like on one hand, there's stuff that's just preparing for mainnet. On the other hand, it's optimizing the testnet experience. On the other hand, it's team construction, making sure that people are like well taken care of, happy, feel that they're growing in their roles, and then also just making sure that the ecosystem is actually cohesive, right? Because I think one of the things that we spend the most time thinking about internally is how to not be like a lot of other chains. And I don't mean that as a shot at other chains. I just mean that I think there's in many cases an opportunity to like take a more a more thoughtful approach to initial ecosystem construction, where a lot of folks take a little bit of like a if you build it they will come sort of attitude, which I very strongly disbelieve. So I'd say like that's probably been one of the central things that everything revolves around. Like how do you build the best eco possible, and how do you set the chain up for success?
Yeah, I think a lot of the success that Berachain has seen as of now has come from that kind of like community building. There's so much lore I feel like involved in the community. It's like very much deep rooted. There were a few things I wanted to kind of bring up to the people who might not really understand fully yet, and just kind of getting into the ecosystem. Um, Curious who came up with the name for Berachain. How did the NFTs come into play? And a little background: you spoke about it last year about the ability for the name to resonate with people that are from like crypto native to the retail world. I think you nailed
Yeah,
the crypto native. How do you feel like a year later how it's maybe entrenching into like the retail world? Also,
yeah,
did
yeah.
you ever find out who coined Ooga Booga beyond your old Drippy Bear account, or is that still unknown?
You're deep in there. I'm not okay.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll try to answer like backwards to some extent. I still don't know who coined Ooga Booga. Like I know I've seen it floating around in like videos on the internet that are kind of cursed. Like that's definitely not the intent slash end game. But I think I swear like in some Twitter chat or in some Discord chat, and I feel like there's an 80% chance it was like OT or like the Alchemic server or like the Yunts or something like that. Like where like one where it must have flown around, but then it just sort of got out of control to the funniest extent. Um, I think around the name and like Berachain itself, you know, there was a while where myself, Papa, and Dev were discussing different names, and we were just like, oh, like, do we want to call it like something funky? Like, do we want to call it like Polar or like Cody? You know what I mean? Like, do we want to call it something that's like bear-ish but not really bear on the nose? And I'm actually not sure which of us came up with it. I want to say it might have been myself, because I sometimes just like go for the on the nose solution for things, in terms of like, okay, well, we just fucking call it Berachain. Like people are calling us the Beras anyway. Like this might make it pretty easy to recognize. So the branding, I think, like a term that we've used before, and it's a term that I talk about a lot internally, is this idea of like a mimetic Trojan horse, right? Like it can be fun, easy to access on the outside, and pretty impressive, I should hope, and meaningful tech on the inside. And I think that is the ideal, that's the ideal divide or balance that we want to be able to strike here. And to date, I think it's served us pretty well. In most cases, for folks who are turned off by the name, it serves as a pretty good like self-selection piece slash filter, right? Like if they won't take a project seriously because it's named kind of stupidly, then I don't think that they are the most thoughtful crypto investors or crypto participants, because some of the most successful projects have sounded stupid as fuck. So I think that like high pass filter is kind of useful there. I think from a retail crowd, we'll see what that perception actually looks like at the end of the day. I've definitely found more and more people like starting to get into it without actually us having a meaningful retail push of any sorts. I think it's just one of those things where, in the same way that like Z has memed like whiff into like a Binance listing effectively, right? I very much think that that same effect where you have a few people who are pretty well connected, who start talking about something, they start telling their friends about something, their friends start telling their friends about something. Like I think that ripple effect is very real. And I just saw like, bro, there was a girl from Toronto who I've never seen in my life talking about how she's part of the Berachain baddies about an hour ago on Twitter. And I'm just like, you know what? That's kind of beautiful. That's really beautiful. So, what I'm getting at is, I don't know exactly what the retail reception will be yet, but I'm hoping it'll be positive. And I think that there's many ways that we can, try to make sure that our brand is approachable and the right mix of native and friendly to new people. And I think like, groups like Flow have kind of tried to do this in the past, but I think they might have like leaned into like the cringe side a little bit more than I would have personally internally. Um, and I think that there's a way in which we can stay true to our roots, but still be like, yeah, like here's how it's easy for you to use. And a lot of that comes down to just making UX better. And that's a lot of what we think about internally as well. And then, sorry, I'm sure there's other parts of that question that I missed because it was a little bit of a multi-parter.
Yeah, too many questions in there. But the how the NFTs came into play.
Yes, and how do we name them? Yeah, so the NFTs came into play like mostly because Papa and I have been playing in the space since like 2019. A good IRL friend, DCF, sort of like pulled me back into crypto after a couple years out of like the space like very actively, right? Like I sort of played 2017, 2018, and I was like, okay, cool. Like my coins are dead. Maybe I'll like not pay as much attention to this for a little while. And then 2019 got excited about things again, and I think in 2021 we saw parallel like the NFT project slash like now like Prime and like gaming slash AI ecosystem get off the ground, and we're like, this is actually really cool. Like this seems like not just like a random scam like 10,000 PFP mint. This seems like they're actually trying to build something funky like Magic the Gathering, Hearthstone, whatever you want to call it, on chain. And it seems like there's a degree of of like I just think like seriousness. There's like an underlying like game to this, right? Beyond just nice NFTs. And we were, I think, like excited about the production value and just how well done that whole thing was. And we were like, okay, maybe it could be cool to try some of the NFT space. And it was very much like a, let's for shits and gigs see what happens if we, try to sell 100 NFTs of bear smoking weed and then figure things out from there. There was no major, grandiose vision at the time. It was just like, hey, this could be funny. We'll make them super cheap so that people can make them accessible, and we'll give them away slash sell them in some of our favorite communities. So, raffle them off in like OMOT and like Frax and like, Curve Alchemics type discords. And like, within a day or within, I should say, an hour or so, like they minted out pretty quickly. And Papa wanted to, I wanted to call them the Bake Bears, which was like a bad idea. Like I thought the Bake Bears made more sense. And Papa was just like, no, like Bong Bears. And I was like, all right, like, that's like kind of funny. Like maybe we'll just rock with Bong Bears and just let it continue that theme that I guess we ran with after a while, just things being perhaps overly on the nose. So that was honestly how it came to be, man. We're just like, yeah, we'll draw a bunch of JPEGs of bears smoking weed and we'll call them the fucking Bong Bears, because what could go wrong with all that? And that's sort of how we got there.
Yeah, I think thinking what could go wrong at that time, definitely given how far things have come, then I don't think you guys were anywhere close to the what could go wrong side of things.
No,
like
listen, we were not ready for the rabbit hole, but like it's been a very welcome one.
Yeah, I'm sure. Definitely like on the community's end as well, I'm sure. I liked what you said earlier about the sort of mimetic Trojan horse that or like approach you guys have employed, which is not something that is very common. I can't really think of anyone else who has, done that to this degree, at least. essentially like having something fun, approachable, easy to understand on the outside, and then having actual like meaningful technological innovations on the inside. Um, can you give us in like a minute? Can you give us a rundown of some of those meaningful innovations?
Yeah. So like, look, I think the biggest core behind Berachain and the thing that makes it really exciting to me is this whole idea of proof of liquidity. In a nutshell, proof of liquidity is effectively a variant of delegated proof of stake. So we're not reinventing the wheel, but what we are changing is the way in which security and governance are, or governance and security and staking are effectively linked when in respect to liquidity. So, normally when you have a pool of capital and, you're on a chain, you can basically choose to either dedicate that capital towards liquidity or to security, right? You can say, hey, I'm going to take my 32 ETH and like run a node kind of thing. Or you can say, I'm going to put that in a, liquidity pool, like a lending market, like money market, what have you, right? Um, on Berachain, the idea is that your liquidity form like serves as a form of security, like A results in B effectively, as opposed to those incentives being traversed. So if you're to like, 1 minute nutshell Berachain, it allows you to effectively use your liquidity that is still productive to generate security in the form of the staking token of the network. And it allows that staking token of the network to be able to direct incentives across the network to power the applications that are building on it. So when we think about Berachain in two ways, it's one, can we drive capital efficiency? Can we make users' liquidity even more useful? Without causing leverage risk or anything of the sort. And at the same time, can we allow the applications building on top of Berachain to be uniquely empowered by building in this ecosystem as opposed to anywhere else? Because I think that there's a lot of chains that will throw grants at you. I think there's a lot of chains that will advertise a fake ecosystem fund. I think there's a lot of chains that will there's a lot of chains that'll do everything except for mechanistically find a way to drive value to your protocol. And our goal is to be the exception there. It's okay, how do we actually make sure that the protocol has a reason to sustainably exist by living on Berachain, as opposed to trying to bribe them with short-term incentives. So that's the thesis in a nutshell, and I'm happy to dive into that in whatever degree of depth is most helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a pretty elegant way to put it to start out. Can we from there can we dissect the tri token model a little bit, or I guess
Yeah,
how each of the three
for
kind
sure,
of
for
plays
sure.
off each other?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start with the simple part, right? And I think that over time, it's becoming a little bit more of like a dual token plus one model, if you will. So Honey is a stablecoin of the network. It starts out very simple, with, 1-to-one USDC slash, USD equivalent backed stablecoin. The goal there is really to err on the, I'd say side of as legally safe as possible. We can be bear smoking weed chain, but we also want to be very cognizant of anything we do because we do want this to be built to last, right? I think there's ways over time they can perhaps get more interesting via governance and once the system is entirely decentralized. But our goal more than anything else is to make sure that Honey serves as a stable unit of value across the ecosystem. And more than anything, actually really helps to empower some of the payment layer plays that might be interesting when we look at corp dev efforts and basically entering into other ecosystems over time, whether that be more prominent stable presence in the Cosmos ecosystem or more of like DeFi native stables over time. So Honey's like pretty simple, right? There's definitely times where it was funkier and like CDP models, etc. But we've tried to err as much on the side of caution there. Then there's BGT and Bera, which sort of make up like the remainder of that tri-token system and then are I think the core interaction there. So BGT is a staking and governance token of the network. The funky part about BGT is that it is entirely illiquid and soul-bound, and there's no way to purchase it on the open market. So you cannot just go on Binance or Coinbase or whatever it is and buy a bunch of BGT when the chain is live. The only way to earn BGT is by doing the work of actually providing liquidity to different primitives and or smart contracts that are basically built into the Berachain ecosystem. So I'll expand on that a little bit. The way that works is that Berachain has a full VM that's full EVM equivalent, so you can deploy whatever Solidity smart contract you want in the same way that you could on mainnet or Arbitrum or what have you. But at the same time, Berachain has a set of DeFi primitives or DeFi Legos that are effectively baked into the chain from the start. So there's a ambient liquidity DEX, there is a perps vault, and there's a stablecoin lending market. And what happens is that the validator set is actually able to direct their block rewards towards these different primitives that are built into the chain, such that they're effectively, they're directing emissions towards the applications they're building on the chain. And over time, any smart contract launched on Berachain can actually, basically receive emissions in the same way that those three core primitives upon the chain starting can. So you could be building an options vault, you could be building an NFT AMM, you could be building a GameFi product, really anything where there's an exchange of liquidity for value of some sort, whether that be fees, token emissions, whatever it is, that can plug into proof of liquidity. And that's the part that gets really interesting. And BGT powers that entire system, right? So on one hand, validators stake BGT to secure the network. On the other hand, users who earn BGT by having LP'd in different products in the network basically delegate that to a validator and use that to influence the rewards rates across the network. So the way to think about that, and I'll just try to zoom out for a second here, is that validators effectively each have their own set of like mini gauges, which they use to distribute BGT across the network. So they can say, hey, I'm going to push 50% of my rewards towards this pool and 50% of my rewards towards the perps vault, right? And that way, every time they win a block, their rewards are split there. And users basically choose to delegate their tokens, their BGT, towards different validators. And the aggregate of all those validators' weights effectively determines the rewards rates across the entire network. So that's kind of long-winded, but that's what BGT is / allows you to do. Other parts to keep in mind there is that BGT accrues fees from all those different primitives that are basically supported by the network. So it accrues a part of the value from the swaps and the DEX, liquidations and funding rates on the perps, liquidations and interest rates on the stablecoin lending, so on and so forth. And over time, same thing for any smart contract built on the chain that is being powered by the validator set, right? So I think that becomes really interesting because it gives users who are staking BGT an actual reason to to hold it and be part of that network, because it means that they're actually receiving value from everything that the network is empowering. And then at any point in time, users can choose to burn that BGT one-to-one for Bera tokens, as in a single Bera token. So you cannot go from BGT to Bera, but at any point you can go from, not go from Bera to BGT, but at any point you can go from BGT to Bera. And Bera itself is perhaps the most simple of the entire set. It's a pretty vanilla gas token of the ecosystem, I'm sure, and we're aware of many ways that people are trying to use it, whether that be in staking protocols or auto compounders or yield farms or whatever it might be in between. But the most simple thing is that Bera is a liquid token and you use it to pay gas. So it really basically gives users two choices. On one hand, they can earn BGT by having done the work of providing liquidity, and they can effectively use that to influence their weight in the network and the weighting of rewards towards things that they care about. They can also use it to earn bribes from validators and protocols. I can expand on this a little bit later, and they can use it to earn fees from the network and everything that's being supported by it. On the other hand, they can just choose to hold a liquid token in the network Bera, and it's really up to them whatever their risk parameter or willingness to influence the network looks like.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there. I guess like the first thing that kind of comes to mind is those three core dApps that you have, those three core primitives you have built into the infrastructure. How do you guys see those three maturing over time as the ecosystem develops, or is it stuff that gets built on top, which
Yeah,
then offers like different changes?
you got it. So I personally think that the more interesting thing is like I think it's actually pretty interesting if those actually get obsoleted over time. They're meant more than anything else to serve two purposes. On one hand, they're meant to serve as a secure capital base, or a secure means of generating BGT, such that we don't have to necessarily trust a third party smart contract with our network security, right? Because the only way of generating it out the gates is going to be by LPing in those different protocols. But over time, if someone builds a better DEX, a better perp vault, a better lending platform, there's nothing that prevents validators and or the chain and or the participants in the community from going and passing a gov vote and saying, hey, we want to be able to add this smart contracts as an eligible source of emissions, or sorry, an eligible destination for emissions, and just basically plug that into the equation instead of it. So at the same time, I do want us to be able to continue developing and make sure that it's as robust as possible and gives people the best trading experience, such that when they get on Berachain, it's super easy to do the things that they'd like to do. But at the same time, we want to foster an environment where we want to encourage competition. So I'd love to see other products going and building stuff either on top of it or even better than the primitives that we start with. And I think part of the goal there, the second part, is also to really, I'd say, avoid the classic Ponzi bullshit that we see in the first like 6 to 12 months of an ecosystem, in that you have like an army of like crappy uni forks and then like 10 Aave forks, and you know what I mean. Like I would rather that we actually set a little bit of a higher bar to start that also helps us bootstrap security and safety, such that folks can't just go and try to like play the Ponzi wars for a while. They actually have to try to build something better to displace the chain decks. Which, yeah, I don't know. I'm sure that that's kind of opinionated, but I hope that at the end of the day, it's for the greater good of the ecosystem, because then people can actually come to Berachain and find things that won't exist anywhere else.
Yeah, I think that's a fair take. I feel like I would agree with that, just to encourage like productive competition above all else. Kind of like tangentially related to that, I've always been interested in um, types of applications or like types of services that are only possible on a given chain or are maybe advantageous to build on a given chain. What are some like use cases that you can think of that you would like to see on Berachain for the reason that it might be only possible on there or advantageous on there versus some other, L2, Alt L1, wherever?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, Berachain is built around this idea of capital efficiency and allowing applications to have like, a much lower, heavily reduced cost of capital acquisition compared to other ecosystems by being able to have applications like plug into POL, et cetera, right? So I think some of the stuff that I'm most excited about out the gates probably comes in the form of like, some liquid staking tokens or liquid staking derivatives that we'll see coming out of the ecosystem. A couple of which are already underway and some of which are being supported by like the ecosystems incubator, Build-A-Bear. I think they'll be able to unlock some pretty cool stuff that you can do with like the liquid stake BGT. Because I don't think we've ever seen a system where you have like the staking token of the network illiquid before, right? It's normally just buy a bunch of AVAX or buy a bunch of ETH or whatever it is, and then stake it, and then job's done. I think it'll be interesting to see what one can do there, especially when you look at different auto compounders, yield aggregators, anything that actually looks for like I'd say more effective sources of yield over time at the network level, because those yields will constantly be changing from the trade-offs between BGT and Bera and the yields on different validators based on their bribes. So I think that'll be pretty interesting to see. Another thing that I think gets really cool that can only be built on top of that is effectively like I guess fixed income slash like interest rate swaps or effectively like fixed loans and fixed rate and fixed income products built around BGT as a whole. Because effectively the fees flowing to BGT will change a whole bunch over time depending on how many people or what portion of the network is staked at any given point in time, what the volume flowing through the network and its different applications are, etc. So you could actually build a pretty interesting like fee market around that I could see kicking up some steam. And then I think some of the stuff that I'm just broadly excited about is stuff that we haven't seen done right before in DeFi, that people are already starting to build on Berachain. I think I've said before, even in like other podcasts recently, that like one of the things I think has the greatest degree of PMF in crypto, for better or for worse, is leverage on shitcoins. And I think shitcoins of all different types and sizes. So there's groups who are building power perps for NFTs. There's groups who are simply building like crazy Oracle-less leverage solutions for like basically your like your long tail assets, and then exotic lending that could basically pair with that. So I think all that kind of stuff I see having meaningful advantages from a capital acquisition and liquidity sustainability side on Berachain.
Your mic's muted up.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of exciting stuff there for sure. Some stuff that I mean some of that stuff like we're seeing built on mainnet or elsewhere, but like it's still not even live yet there. So seeing it like on Berachain versus elsewhere too, definitely going to be exciting like for the primitive itself or the technology itself. Definitely like a lot we can talk about in terms of like vision and like where you guys hope to go, what gets you excited. I'm also, given that testnet just launched, I'm interested to hear like what your takeaways are from that so far, from how the performance has been, maybe some learnings from it. Because a million users in what, like a week, that's insane. I'm sure there's a lot you guys have to like unpack there in terms of data and findings.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think that, and like, look, we're more than aware that there's definitely a healthy, or perhaps unhealthy amount of bots mixed into the equation there, but have also been trying to do as much as we can from different data angles to screen that out. And I think that we've like while we are sure that there's like 500K plus bots, there's actually like a very like meaningful amount of real users in there too. And sure, some of them are doing quests and stuff, but like we're also just seeing more and more folks hitting us up, being like, "Hey, we're actually interacting with the network. Here's things that we want to change. Here's ideas for cool bug fixes. Here's cool feature ideas." Like I think what's been most rewarding is getting the feedback from like people who are trying to deploy on top of Airchain in terms of things we can do from improving DevX, like just making it easy for people to build, and also maybe making it easier for people to use like the core applications. So I think the user feedback and the degree of attention and detail that people are willing to go into just because they think a product is cool is very like it's very heartening to see. Like there's like these like helper chats that we have within the Discord where folks are just down to hop in with the devs and basically do like a product QA session live as we're pushing different changes. And I know that I know the community becomes a lot of a meme within crypto. And I understand, like, it's unfortunate to say, but in many cases, like, nothing builds or crushes a community as much as like sentiment and price action, right? Um, and I certainly hope that ours will sustain throughout the toughest of times and so on and so forth. But I do think that like that is something that has revealed itself as a superpower over the last little while. I've seen groups that need to pay their communities unholy amounts and need to like put on some like unholy amounts of like just dog and pony shows to get them to engage and stuff. Meanwhile, I think that we've been very lucky to have like a strong core and a highly autistic core that's allowed us to get a whole bunch of really helpful folks on board. I think we also learn more about just like the technical limits of some of the stuff that we're using, right? Like the Cosmos SDK and or the Comet mempool was not built off that for millions of users. And that's something that I worry about a little bit less on mainnet, to be quite honest, because there's more of a barrier to entry. You're not getting free tokens. It's not like, hey, you can just run a bot and hit the faucet a billion times without a meaningful cost. But at the same time, it exposes us to the fact that if we're experiencing the same levels of if we go to 10x the traffic of Arbitrum or something, like life becomes harder for us. So it's also been teaching us to double down on some of the areas where we can just scale things from an RPC side to support network load, from an actual mempool construction side to make sure we can handle a good degree of concurrent transactions, everything in between. Because when I think about what we want to do end game, like the whole vision and what we do want Bear to turn into is the place where people go to launch something cool, new, and interesting. I don't necessarily subscribe to the displacing ETH vision. I think that ETH is here to stay. And I think there's lots of chains that are building cool improvements, but I do believe that there's a world in which you can build a more, interesting ecosystem and a more capital efficient ecosystem than ETH. And I think that we can, I think that's the kind of stuff that we're shooting at. So, have the best builders, build the best stuff, and make it the easiest for people to use. So yeah, I think that we learned a lot about things that we'll have to handle as we scale. And I'm sure some of those problems will be relevant for mainnet, others may not be. I think we learned a lot about how we can, really weaponize the community in terms of, getting good feedback and helping to improve the systems that we're building ourselves.
And the chain isn't even real. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah, dude. The whole time it's not real.
I mean,
it's fucked.
I observe it as like, yeah, you mentioned like the possibility of people using bots or whatever, but the brain power and effort to even make those or kind of decide to even do that is not even happening anywhere else. So counting that out completely, I think is a bit whack. But you guys killed it on there. It's fucking
No,
awesome.
much appreciated, man. And one thing I will say, like, this is like kind of a fried take, but like, hear me out, right? Like, yeah, I have no doubts that there are bots, but if there's like more bots than anywhere else, it's also kind of bullish because it means that people want to bot the shit out of this for better or for worse. And of course, we're going to have a lot of things in place. Yeah, like we didn't expect this in the slightest.
Yeah.
We did not expect this at all, and I'm like humbled by it, and I just hope that we live up to the expectations, and a lot of it ends up as very real on mainnet. And I wish the best to everyone trying to farm it. I can just tell you that we are thinking a lot about how to make sure that the right people are rewarded in that.
I think the testnet token is like actually trading with value on testnet. So like a 4 bill FTV. Like
yeah, so
isn't even real.
It was trading for $8 on gas.zip, and I was like, bro, this can't be legal. So that was entertaining. I'm not gonna lie. I got a good laugh out of that one.
I wanted to talk a little bit. You touched on like the Cosmos ecosystem. This isn't like a tech heavy podcast.
Yeah.
But I do want to get like a kind of high level breakdown of the tech stack, more detail on how it can like allow developers to do things that users will feel and notice immediately. Because I think a majority of new L1s or L2s, like the first thing they talk about is TPS or kind of these like well-known metrics. I don't really hear much of that from Berachain, which I kind of like. I think TPS is a meme. But yeah, just kind of like what the noticeable differences of like the tech stack will be, if you got anything there.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think, I talked a little bit about POL and sort of like the way that plays into things. And that's like somewhere between the economic and tech stack, because a lot of that is the validator protocol interactions that we haven't really seen before. What that also does is probably opens up a really interesting space for MEV down the road. And it's a space that, to be clear, we haven't like deeply explored as of yet, right? But since these validators are basically directing their own block rewards towards different pools, in some cases ones where they may even be LPs in those pools as well, from their own personal accounts, whatever it may be. And different pools and or different applications being, powered by the chain and receiving emissions are giving fees back to the validator plus their delegates. There's another set of incentives that you don't typically see in like a standard proof of stake network, right? And that a validator might actually want to reorder like blocks / reorder like transactions effectively to favor, transactions, maximizing their fees or, making it most advantage for their LP positions. So I think that kind of stuff gets very fascinating down the road from like an actual construction point of view. Then when we look at it from like a implementation point of view of like the actual structure of Berachain, Berachain is built on our implementation of EVM on Cosmos, which is called Polaris. And Polaris is basically meant to try to serve as the best of both worlds, getting us the ease of use and dev experience of the EVM, with the ability to basically unlock the potential of the Cosmos SDK under the hood from a modularity, interoperability, ease of use point of view. And the way that we see it is like Cosmos is a great tech stack in terms of building sovereign and very customizable blockchains. It's not the best ecosystem to align with from a branding point of view, and it's not exactly a community that takes very quickly / kindly to fund new games from what we've seen from like a financial experimentation side, right? Like I think Luna might have experimented too far, to be clear, and then that's not where we're trying to be associated with or anything of the sort. I'll remind people that Honey is 100% collateralized by USDC, cannot be minted against Vera, yada yada yada. There's no funky shit there. Very much divided between church and state. But to actually answer your question, right, one of the cool things that one can do is actually build these things, build with what we call stateful precompiles that allow you to add a layer of pre-processing before executing something in the EVM / Solidity environment. So one can actually call Cosmos SDK modules directly from the EVM. So you could use that to construct a better bridge, a better oracle, in some cases more parallelized transaction type systems, something that allows you to, set almost like cron jobs for transactions at the beginning and end of each block. There's a number of ways you can leverage the SDK. They're still not great to use, in my opinion, from a developer experience point of view and from chatting with teams, which is why, it's not something that we've gone like full balls deep on, but it's something that we hope to actively improve over the future, such that if and when people want to build cool stuff with them, that they have the ability to do so. But I think the big, upside of what we've built in our implementation of EVM on Cosmos is that on one hand, it's super modular, and that word's become a bit of a meme, but really what it does mean is that if you want to use, half the stack versus the entire thing, it's very easy to plug and play or choose certain elements you want to include or not. And the other thing is that we basically have, full Geth RPC compatibility. So, I don't know if you guys tried to use like, Ethermint or, I should say Evmos, like Cantor or stuff like that in the past, but in many cases there's been, issues in terms of MetaMask or Rabby, et cetera, compatibility. We're lucky to be able to have all that kind of stuff out the gates. Rabby added our support a couple days ago. We've been MetaMask compatible since day one. Also means that when it comes to like block explorers, anything like Nansen, analytics platforms, Parsec, what have you, it becomes very plug and play. And then at the same time, if someone's a Cosmos SDK enthusiast, as we add IBC support over time, you'll be able to bridge assets from all sorts of different places as well. So where I think that gets really cool is that theoretically Berachain turns into this hub between worlds where you actually have the greatest total accessible liquidity out of any currently existing chain. Right, you have the access to the entire EVM world of liquidity with our bridging partners, and then via IBC you'll have access to the entire Cosmos ecosystem and anything that's being built there. So I think that thesis has bin attempted in a manner before, but it was a little bit too duct taped. And I'm not saying that we're going to be perfect as of yet, but I really do want to work towards that, such that we can have like that thesis that like everyone hates us, but I call it like our Billy Ray Cyrus thesis, where it's like EVM in the front, Cosmos in the back, and just get the best of both worlds there.
And
That was a crazy reference. I love it.
Until I start talking about Ric Flair. But yeah.
The whole like messaging thing. I watched like Dev Bears. It was like posted on Celestia's YouTube, but the whole messaging thing that sits between like Polaris and ETH execution client, like that kind of like breaks my brain a bit. Is that what you're referencing? Like on the communication side, does that make bridging like a lot more safer? Does that make like, what does that do for like an end user? That whole messaging aspect.
I guess the way that you would think about it is for an end user, like they won't know or they won't be able to tell that they're using a Cosmos chain at the end of the day is the way I think about it. Like unless you're a validator on Berachain, there's very few places, if any, where you're like, oh, like this feels Cosmos-y. You don't have to use Kepler. You know what I mean? You don't have to use any of the stuff that I think people normally associate with Cosmos from like a use point of view. And I think some of the stuff that you might have seen from the modular summit, if that's what you're referring to, is like just the idea of like how, Berachain effectively has like this like it has its own like parallel chain structure like baked into it, where you have sort of like an EVM chain and a Cosmos chain running side by side, with the EVM chain like pulling data from the Cosmos chain. And I may have bastardized that to some extent because I'm not DevBear. But the way to think about it is that it's kind of exactly as I described. You very much get the EVM front-facing experience with Cosmos being used on the back end. I wouldn't say it necessarily makes like bridging safer or easier or anything of the sort. Like, IBC is IBC, and our bridge partners are our bridge partners. It just basically means that you have the exact same level of risk and the exact same, ideally better ease of use, and you get a number of other ecosystems from that point of view.
Yeah, you touched on the kind of like partners you'll have. That's a nice segue into the Build a Bera incubator that you're building. You describe it as like a 0 to 1 incubator. What are you aiming to play with in that incubator? Do you have any leaks for any of the 5 projects that are in that we're in that at the end of that thread?
Yeah. I think what I can say there is like the whole idea of Build-A-Bear is to, help support, great teams of builders who are native to the Berachain ecosystem, and try to help, remove as much of the, difficult start, like a lot of the cold start stuff, I think, and a lot of like the more annoying logistics of getting a company off the ground, from them, right? So, we've built companies before. We're founders. Sammy internally leads our program. He founded Redacted Cartel and the associated suite of products, and has been, born and raised in the crypto world, and is one of the sharpest dudes I know, especially when it comes to mechanism design, tokenomics, everything in between. And I tend to help a lot on like the go-to-market strategy side, thinking about branding, thinking about fundraising, all the stuff in between there. So when I think about the goals for the program, it's one, set a high bar for the ecosystem and make sure that the talent coming out early is there, such that, as I mentioned before, we skip that 6 to 12 months of Ponzi bullshit, and that there's good teams building interesting new things. That sort of leads into the second point. We want to help support and build ideas that are only really achievable on Berachain, or things we've never seen before in other ecosystems that really could thrive on Berachain. So I think those are probably the first 2 things that we try to do. And then beyond that, it's also, I think, just to show the ecosystem that the foundation and its extensions really are meant to be there as a resource for them, and to provide kind of like a white glove experience for the best teams. And I shouldn't just say the best teams, but there's obviously some that we can dedicate more attention to than the other. It's more that we want to make sure that there's a strong contingent of projects there from day one, that can really show the best of the ecosystem and its capabilities. So there's a couple things in the gaming space, a couple of things in the DeFi space, something in the gaming space, some stuff in RWAs. So we're trying to cover the gamut a little bit there, and not be too DeFi T-shaped, because I think that there's already going to be a fuck ton of DeFi on Berachain, and it's good to be able to round it out a little bit.
Yeah, one thing you've constantly like expressed is the idea of like finding PMF without a token to see if like users actually care. How does that play into some of the projects you kind of worked with early on?
Yeah, it's a good question, man. I think a lot of it comes down to how far they'll go before actually issuing a token or not. I think that a lot of these groups have designs that are meant to be quite sustainable, like Sauce token. But I also do think that right now, for better or for worse, the end state of almost all projects is token, or nowadays seemingly points then token, which is like kind of even more annoying. So I think that there's a lot that could be gained out of like seeing how far one can go without it, as long as it's done in a manner where it isn't just clearly an anticipation of something of the sort. Right. So I do have a lot of respect for protocols that can go the distance, but I also do think they're few and far in between.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And my this is like kind of a random question, and it was from a while ago, so I don't know if you can answer it, but in like the little research that I did before this, I came across your raise announcement from back in April. There were talks of some like TVL commitments up to like I think $250 million. Is that still like well, number one, is that correct? Is that the case? And if so, do you have an idea like how that capital will be deployed?
Yeah. So I think I can say it was definitely correct at the time, or in the time leading up to it. I can't say for sure exactly where it stands at the moment, to be honest with you, because markets changed a whole bunch. FTX happened, a bunch of other stuff happened not too long before that. So I think some funds have blown up, some funds have moved on, some funds have actually sized up. So the way I see it is, I think that we'll come out the gates with a pretty healthy amount of TVL. But I'm also cognizant about committing, overcommitting and under delivering on where we'll actually end up there. Where I can be pretty confident is that a lot of that capital, or a lot of the capital that will be on the chain day one, will effectively start by being deployed into some of the core chain products, whether that's the DEX, whether that's into Honey, whether that's into the perps vault, depending on if they're feeling kind of degen, whatever it is that people are feeling. It's more about being able to actually show there's that snowball starting nice and early. And I do think that over time, that should hopefully only evolve. And we do have regular conversations with folks about folks who want to be able to deploy meaningful capital in Bera.
Yeah, and I don't know if we're running up on time for you, if you have a hard stop, or do you have a few extra
Yeah,
minutes?
I got like 3 or 4 minutes, but I probably got to hop after that.
Okay. When rebase, and is it going to be called Blown Out Bears still, or is it something else?
Oh man, that's good. No, still not quite sure what we're gonna call it. We've got some ideas. Rebase will be on Berachain. Like rebase will happen once the chain is live. And I think that should also help to kickstart the NFT ecosystem and get some fun stuff for some of our favorite projects like Cedo Swap and some of the other boys. Some non-fungibles to play with.
Definitely on the lookout for that one. We'll start to wrap up here. We don't want to take too much of your time, but I would like to give you like a minute or two if you'd like to, provide any closing statements, anything that we might have missed that you think the audience should be aware of. Any like calls to action? Should we go and deploy more basic like ERC20s through third web, or like what's the plan here?
I think that what you should do is you should talk to homies who are building cool stuff because, much love to our third web guys. We actually just hired their ex, BD lead over there, to help with our corp dev efforts. But we more than that care about people who are like going to build cool shit. And there's actually some that we've been cooking up on that same lens to help incentivize and or spur some of those groups into action. So once we're ready to turn on the floodgates there'll be a point at which there's a call to action around just like deploying smart contracts ASAP Rocky. So my thoughts would be, if folks already have contracts deployed, that's even better. We care a lot about the folks that, are early and are supporting us and are helping us figure out things that might go wrong down the road. And we care, just as much about folks who come and answer the call when we say, hey guys, like it's time to see who's building the cool shit on Berachain, and to let the community decide. So yeah, that's happening in the next little while. I'd say for now, if you're a builder and you're thinking about different places you want to go, then obviously I'm biased, but I think you'd be remiss if you didn't give us a shout. We do our very best to support all the different groups building with us, and to make sure that they have the best experience possible. Because it's corny to say, but honestly, if they win, we win too, right? Like it's very incentive aligned in terms of groups that are building on top of us. And I also generally think it's just like fun to see people building interesting things in a playground that you kind of helped create.
Well said. Yeah, I think I think it's kind of hard not to be excited about everything going on. Me personally, like not being a dev, obviously, but hearing the emphasis that you guys have on developer experience and really helping people along who are looking to build and really just fostering that win-win relationship, like I think that goes a long way. And that combined with what you guys are doing on the tech side, on the infrastructure side, it's certainly going to be a fun one. Yeah, I think that about brings us to time here. Thanks again, Smokey. This was a ton of fun. We'll definitely,
Yeah.
we've been following along for a while. We definitely won't stop now. Definitely excited for you guys.
Cheers, man. Yeah, I appreciate you guys and thanks for having me on.